sex talk with Erica Miley. 'Cause sexuality is tough. And okay, sex just isn't good enough. No. Sex talk with Erica Miley.
Hey folks, welcome to Sex Talk with Erica Miley. Erica Miley here. I brought yet another Twitter crush to you. I find all of the wonderful people and interact with. Essentially, I feel like we have like a almost like a sex Twitter, like hashtag sex educator, certified educator / sex therapist Twitter. I brought you Gigi Engle, CSE, an award-winning feminist author, certified sex coach, sexologist, and sex educator, now in school to be sex therapist. We have found that we are twins at so many levels already. Gigi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So we're going to jump right in because you wrote a really cool book, and I think that this book, especially when I'm talking to my clients, when listeners email, one of the things that I am again and again struck by is who helps all of us walk through some of the sexual questions that we have from being young people and then forward. And you wrote this book called All the Fucking Mistakes, which, beautiful, beautiful title, by the way. Essentially trying to give women a friend, a cousin, a sister to walk through, learn about sex, love, and life. What really surprised you on your own journey, and maybe through this book? Like you learned something about love and sex and thought, well, maybe that might be new.
So I actually wrote the book. It's kind of semi-autobiographical because like the book is basically based off of, it's a different time of my life, this book. Mm-hmm. It was written at a time when I was a sex columnist and a sex researcher and journalist. So I was not, at the time when I was first writing it, I wasn't a certified sex educator. I was in the process of becoming a certified sex educator. So a lot of my experience and lessons from the book are based on my personal experience. Which was being kind of a fuck girl, messed with people, like did some manipulative stuff I'm not proud of, but at the same time, like really kind of exploring my own sexuality and doing this manipulative stuff because I was behaving in a way that I thought was like the colloquial cool girl. And trying not to, I'm doing air quotes, like catch feelings. And being just like cool and sleeping with people, and didn't really take into account that guys and women, the women I was with, I especially regret, honestly. But like the people I was dating would like have feelings for me and I would like not treat them very well. There were like I did have a lot of experiences that were like also quite abusive and traumatizing towards myself, which I think also influenced some of this behavior. But like a lot of what I learned along the way influenced the way that I was writing and helped me develop my voice because the way that I grew up, the way that I was brought up around sex really gave me the voice that I had. And when I started working at Elite Daily, which is a millennial focused website that focuses on all sorts of issues. These days, they're extremely reputable. At the time, we were kind of like a content farm where like it was kind of the early days of these kinds of mass websites, like BuzzFeed was even new. And it was basically like, listicle stuff, like, 10 reasons why your dad was your first love, or like 10 reasons why your sister's your best friend, and like, stuff like that. So you could just basically write whatever you wanted. But it was an amazing space for me to grow my voice, because I had little to no structure. I had a very cool editor, Caitlin Colley, always will appreciate her. She basically wouldn't censor anything that I wrote. So I was able to get as raunchy and weird with it as I wanted. And she was down.
Very cool. It sounds like a really interesting place in your life to kind of get to play with these different, for lack of a better way to put it, because it almost, as you were describing it, almost was like this sounds like a trope that we as women haven't really talked a lot about. I think we see it represented in movies culturally, like the cool girl idea, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
But I don't know that like the idea of the fuck girl has been truly fully explored, or at least maybe even inside of ourselves. Because I definitely get clients who are wrestling with this idea. The thing maybe
if you wanna learn about the fuck girl, read my book.
Yeah, but in our women in their 20s that might experiment with this. I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, maybe an identity. Maybe it's a cultural identity. That
I think what it is that it's it's a bit of a power grab.
Yeah.
We live in a world that is systematically designed to favor men and put women at a disadvantage. So sometimes taking on this role of a fuck girl can be like it's the opposite of a fuck boy, in case anyone didn't catch that. It feels like you're almost like taking back the power, but but when it's like, and in some ways that can be very empowering behavior to like, have sex with, in a way, like it can be healthy, like having sex with who you want, like feeling comfortable with yourself, like taking your identity back, like not being subjugated by like the feelings of men or partners, and just kind of like owning your own life and like really kind of putting your own needs before other people. But where it falls into fuck girl status is like where you start being as bad as men can often be, by like being manipulative and being coercive, not necessarily coercive, but kind of like, going on dates so that someone will pay for dinner and then like ditching them and leading people on, or cheating on people because you don't have enough self-esteem to tell them that you don't want to see them anymore. And like that kind of behavior that's like toxic.
I think you're onto something about that power grab, that when you have felt powerless, regardless of what has happened in your life, we will experiment with different ways to get any kind of power back. And I can't tell you how many times
I have a past. Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt you. I was going to say, I have a past with like sexual assault with, like a lot of times where like my agency was taken from me. And so that period of my life, like my like late teens, early 20s were very much like, and early to mid 20s was like a time of me like really behaving in a way that was like reactionary to that, I think.
Rather than like cultivating. It's kind of, it's almost like I'm hearing a difference and a distinction that you're making there. Yeah.
But it was also a period of like immense growth at the same time. It's like, I got this job. I started writing about sex. The thing was like, I think because I was so, and I am still to this day, it's like, this is kind of my personality. I shouldn't say this is like something that came out. This has always been kind of how I am. I've really never given a fuck. Like, can we swear on here? We can, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So like,
fuck is like my favorite word.
Really like never given a fuck. So like the way that I had gotten the job in the first place was like, I was in college and I wrote this, since removed it. It was on the internet for a long time. So I kind of thought it showed my roots, but it was this blog called Cigars and Jewelry. And it was like a blog that I had started on like Blogspot, like back in the day.
Oh yeah.
Like when blogging first became a thing, where I would like overshare like really intense, like graphic stories about like my dating life and sex life. And so, like, and I thought it's like
that, like Live Journal.
It was stuff. Like that. Yeah. It was kind of like the next generation of Live Journal, where it was kind of like it was like right before WordPress. It was like these blog spots. So like I had this blog and I would share all this stuff. And I guess like a person who worked at Elite Daily, like was somehow got onto the blog. Like I got a pretty decent following because I was like sparing no details.
Yeah.
I think at that point, it's never really affected me, but I kind of came of age as a writer in a time where we were not as a culture fully aware of the pervasiveness of what we say stays on the internet forever. Or how many people will have access. Like it never even occurred to me. First of all, I was extremely self-centered at this point in my life, but also like it never occurred to me that the guys I actually hooked up with would ever see what I had written. Yeah. And I had one guy who I dated he was a scumbag, to my defense, but he like fully read a bunch of my blogs and actually like had some like really thoughtful and nice things to say about it. So I have to like, and his nickname on the blog was the Chubby Scotsman. And he seemed to like, which is like a horrible, mean like name for him. And like, he didn't, but he like never commented on that. He was just like, oh, like I saw your blog and you're like quite a good writer. And I was like, oh, thank you. After he'd been like such a piece of shit to me. But,
but I mean, I think you're also speaking to this. There's a small part of this cultural piece of talking about dating that where even sometimes with groups of friends, we will name people that we are dating, not necessarily their real name. And we will, even when we're talking to our friends about it.
Well, it's like I think it's a part of like I mean, first of all, it's like you have to avoid liability as best you can. But also I think it's like because if you're talking to friends, you give them distinct characteristics because your friend's not going to remember like the 5 Brians that you dated.
Yeah.
But they will remember Brian with the gap tooth or like Brian Brian with the weird tattoo. Like they'll remember that.
Was this the short one?
Is this short Henry or was this Henry who had the neck tattoo? And you're like, oh, short Henry. And they're like, oh, okay. So they can contextualize stuff that they weren't there for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's some sort of cultural pieces to this that I think you're pulling out that I think are important. So, I mean, along with that, so why is it, do you think, just based on your own journey? I mean, I know I have stories. Like, why is it important to have that big sister, do you think? That woman to help you understand your body and sex?
I mean, I think the reason I kind of became like the internet's agony aunt on all things, I became this character, Auntie Gigi, was because like people, first of all, I've completely shit sex education.
Same.
I was like anyone in the US pretty much, and most places other than like, Norway and the other Nordic countries and, Amsterdam. Amsterdam, you know what I mean?
Yes. The Dutch know what they're doing.
I was like, sorry,
the Netherlands.
I was like, wow, that was dumb. I was like, to make it even worse, the other day on a podcast, I called Canada Canada. So like, it's like, that's kind of where I am in life, I suppose.
We can only
I'm rolling with it.
After 2020, we just have less abilities.
I kind of became this like internet agony aunt and started like the Ask Gigi advice column because I was getting all of these questions from readers who they were asking me questions like that to me. And I was in kind of my own little world, my little like bubble of sex education where I thought were like very basic questions. And I mean, to this day, I still get questions that are like, I can't have orgasm during penetration and I'm having penetrative sex and I'm not orgasming and I don't understand why. And to me, I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? But then I'm like, oh, I actually understand, because it's like when you've grown up in a culture that is extremely driven by purity culture, like everything is a backdrop of religion and purity culture. We don't have sex education. We have parents who expect the teachers to talk about sex, and then the teachers who expect the parents to talk about sex, and nobody actually talks about sex. And we have no understanding of queer education, relationships, like no understanding, no mention whatsoever of the clitoris, like, or masturbation, anything like that. It's like people don't have the language. They don't have the understanding of their own bodies. It's kind of like asking somebody to like walk in and be able to do basic math without having ever taken a math lesson.
Right. Language acquisition is like one of our first things that we gain as humans. And yet we leave this entire section of humanity out when it comes to language acquisition.
Exactly. And we don't give sex any sort of context. And so, and we don't give people a vocabulary, and we don't give people an understanding of how to treat people who are sexual partners in a respectful manner. And like, we just don't have this we have this like huge gap.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we're happy to teach our kids about absolutely everything, but when it comes to sex, it's like this huge blank hole, unless you call it like the capital T, the talk. And it's supposed to be this one this one talk you have with your kids, which is, first of all, setting yourself up for disaster, because that's extremely awkward, and no like 12-year-old wants to sit with their parents while they teach them like what a condom is. And
right.
also because sex education should begin from like the time kids are very little.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
it should start with, it's age appropriate, there's nothing wrong with showing a 6-year-old like a diagram of a uterus and like a penis and like the ovaries and everything, and showing them like how babies are made, and also beginning with like consent education and bodily autonomy. And like, and the fact that we like completely just abandon scientific data, the fact that like places that have comprehensive sex education, lower STI rates, lower pregnancy rates. And then if you look at the US, and like, it's just, and lower sexual assault rates, of course, it's like, it's just like so mind boggling that we just like, just choose to ignore these like undisputed facts, or just like, I guess they are disputed, but just like irrefutable facts, I should say. Yeah. Even though people try to refute them as much as possible. And so I took on this position as kind of being the internet agony aunt, because like nobody else would. And it's really, really important for people to have somebody that they can go to, and not necessarily me, but sort of like in general, like a sex positive, like cool aunt, a cool sister who like knows their shit, who they can talk to about sexuality that isn't uncomfortable because your parents have made it uncomfortable. You don't want to ask them questions. And other than that, it's like, what resources do you have?
I also think that there is something to be said for taking the pressure off of parents in some ways too, because here's the reality. Parents have been given nothing to work from. They're working from no map, right? Like no map. Yeah. They were not given a map themselves. So they just carry this
good moms,
this pressure.
And bad moms, bad dads and good dads. And you have to fit inside of the box. And if you don't, you're the worst person in the world. And parents become parents, and we're like, oh, fuck, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to in my practice that just they feel paralyzed by it because of not only just maybe their own trauma, but their own feeling like they have to do it perfectly, or they're going to fuck up their kid for the rest of their life. Like, it's incredible pressure.
A lot of what stops parents from having these conversations is that exact pressure of like very much a fear of like fucking up their kid, and also like their own personal discomfort around sexuality for good reason, because they have grown up in a culture that has treated sex the exact same way. Like, I can give a personal example from my own life. It's like my mother is actually quite sex positive herself, and she's quite a nudist at home. Like, she just like loves being naked. All my friends in high school like met her naked, like all of them. Actually, a kind of funny story that's kind of mean to my mom, but actually like it's just like too good to not share. Like I was with my friend Dylan. He was gay. And we were in high school, and he had never met my mom before, and she was like fully naked. And he was like, "Oh, I wasn't 100% sure I was gay before, but I now sure am." And it was like really funny, but also it's kind of like a plus to my mom, because she was rocking like the full 70s bush like a queen, but she also has like a rockin' body. So I was like, good on you. But at the same time, I was like, Mom, can you put on maybe like a sarong when you've meeting a 15-year-old you've never met for the first time?
I do think that is that person in your life that helped kind of show you that, oh, you can step outside of these cultural expectations. There's some risk to it. So I think that's an important thing for us to talk about is what have been the risks to maybe even to you or to other women who do step outside of these cultural expectations. How has it changed who stays in your life?
That's actually a fascinating question when it comes to my own personal life. I should say it's a very fascinating question to myself. I think when you step inside this work,
yes,
and you choose to be a woman who openly talks about sex in a public setting, there will be people who will stay and there will be people who will go.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be a lot of identity crisis during that time where, you know, feelings of abandonment, feelings of being hurt, not really a lot of misunderstanding when people just don't understand or can't really understand. Like, for instance, an example from my life, which is why this is so poignant. I was in a kind of like my first like real love was when I was like 24 or 25 when we met. And we were together for 3.5 years, almost 4, and lived together. And I kind of thought I like had figured it out, that like he was like my person, and like I had like figured it out. Not for any real reason did I think that. I think I just like, honestly, it's like, I think because I was talking so openly about sex, I wanted to have like a relationship locked down so I wouldn't have to worry about dating, being like a public sex figure, which is like, now that I'm like older, I realize is like problematic in itself. But like, so he met me when I was originally like an editorial assistant and like not talking about sex publicly. So like a very different relationship dynamic. And my career basically exploded. And he and I had very different ideals about like what marriage would mean for us, that kind of thing. Like, he really wanted me to stay home with our kids, which I really actually is something I would like to do. I already do work from home and I really want to stay home with my children as well. But he basically expected me to give up my career. He started getting very uncomfortable with, really, I think what it kind of boiled down to was how much success I was having. And then, so he was kind of uncomfortable with that because he himself, I think, was a bit envious of that, which is me. That's just an assumption from my own perception. But really where the relationship breaking point came was I wrote an article in 2017 about anal sex for Teen Vogue. And I didn't realize I had written plenty of racy stuff for them before.
Right.
Like plenty of things that I like could have garnered plenty of attention. But this article, people like lost their fucking minds. To this day, and I have written hundreds and thousands, a bazillion at this point, articles. It is to this day the most subversive article I've ever written, apparently, in culture. People lost their fucking minds. This like, so like to the point where this like woman who's like a neo-Nazi, as it turns out, did a book burning of like a bunch of issues of Teen Vogue. But I'm so not affected by trolls that my response to it was, she thought I was in print. Like, didn't even occur to me that like that was my reaction. And like, meanwhile, my partner at the time is, that was my reaction. I didn't, because I've never given a fuck. I just don't give a fuck.
Well, but I mean, also like this, it's also kind of not a surprise, because anytime we talk about teenagers being sexual, oftentimes that is when people become the most, I don't know, probably uncomfortable. And then as a result, aggressive. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we were talking before about promiscuity. I was called a sodomite on Fox News by Sean Hannity. Like the word sodomy in 2017 on a major news network.
I really want to see the history on his
computer. I don't know if he named, I would love to see the history on his computer. I am going to guess it has plenty of free sites on there.
Oh yeah.
But he was like, Teen Vogue is, and this writer is a sodomite. And so people kept calling me a pedophile and a sodomite and all this stuff. And the article itself, if you read it, it has diagrams that I did with the illustrator there. It's just a very, very straightforward article about the risks and the positives and how to do it safely. Just a basic explainer.
Yes.
It is so straightforward. And I was really lucky because, I was a freelancer. It was originally my editor, Vera Papasova's idea to write the article. And so I wrote it, I didn't even think twice. I was like, yeah, for sure, I can do that. Like, wrote it. And she and Phil, I forget his last name, Phil Ellis, I think. He was at the time the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue. Philip Ellis, excuse me, I think is his name. He and all of Teen Vogue and Condé Nast stood behind me. They were like, he himself is a gay man. And he was like, this is like homophobia. This is fucked up. But the point being, like, my partner at the time, it was kind of like we were having a lot of problems for a long time, but that was basically the breaking point where he, like, at that point just couldn't handle the pressure. And it was never about my safety. It was always about his safety. Like, he was afraid people were going to find his information and dox him and all this stuff. And I was like, and I think this probably didn't help with the breakup, but I was like, dude, nobody gives a fuck about you. I was like, this isn't about you, dude.
Yeah, and it's like you have several examples of that, like pushing up against however he saw his identity.
Yeah, seriously. He thought he was much more important than he was. The day that we broke up, the break, really, like the last straw was like, I got this email from a guy that was it was exceptionally violent, and at one point he said, I'm going to rape you to death. And I posted the photo online, and my boyfriend's response was, you showed that guy's email. Now he's going to get harassed by all of your followers.
Oh, yeah, that would have been the end.
And I left the apartment. And, you know, it's really sad. I left the apartment, and he actually ended up breaking up with me the next day. Like, I didn't even think, because, like, breakup was never, like, I never thought we could break up. Even though looking back, I'm like, obviously. But now at the time, it was like, what? Me? Like, but looking back, I'm like, oh wait, yeah, no, obviously. Hindsight's 2020, and also I think when you think you're so wise when you're 27, but then you look back and you're like,
of course,
I was an idiot. And I'm sure I'll look back at 30 in 5 years and be like, man, I was stupid.
Yeah, probably when we're I'm not looking back at that. I'm 37, and I'm not looking back at 30 yet and going, that was stupid. I think probably when I'm 60, maybe that's when I'll start looking back.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes me feel better, because I was like, I hope I'm not looking back at now in like 5 years. And I'm like, God, I was a dumbass. I really feel like I have my life together in so many ways that I didn't at that time. But, speaking as far as, and I also had, like, you know, I had a best friend as well at the time. He was like, this, I don't think so had so much to do with my career, is that I think he and I grew apart in a lot of ways, but like our relationship was no longer compatible. We had been best friends since high school. And actually I mourn the friendship of this loss so much more than I ever did my relationship with this dude. Cause, we had been, you know, best friends since we were ever, since we were in high school, since we like lived together all through college. And then like a year and a half or 2 years after college, like had always lived together, went to the same college, like followed each other to New York. Well, he didn't follow me, but like I was already at college, and I was a year older than him. So he came a year after me. He didn't follow me there, but like that's how we got super, super close, was like he had moved. And we lived together forever, and we were like the bestest friends. And then like our relationship kind of fell apart. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that we were growing up, but I think that some of it had to do with the fact that he was quite judgmental. He was a very judgmental person. And like, I think one of the things you find when you start becoming a part of the sex positive space, and you find, and now that I've found my people like you, people like within the sex positive Twitter community, of course, and here in London where I'm living, people in New York, like all over the place. Those small microcosms, you kind of, once you find your like-minded people, you realize that like, you actually don't have to put up with that bullshit.
You are onto something here that I think is, I myself have definitely across the interest in not only just sex therapy, but showing up wholly and fully as myself. I think that includes truly our sexual selves, and being able to communicate about sex has been part of that. But like that box that we are as women expected to play within, much like men have a box, like the risks to us, like you just stated a very clear one. You got an email that said that I'm going to rape you to death. So the consequences of being outside of these cultural norms for many of us is death. That's scary shit. And it's hard to confront.
It's very difficult. I think the risks to women it's kind of immeasurable compared to men. And like, that's a word that that's used, that people say to me, that it hadn't resonated. It didn't resonate for so long. Cause I guess I think I was maybe blocking off I was so desensitized, I should say, to like abuse from online people. It's been so long since I've been writing online that like, it doesn't really faze me. I think that I didn't really realize like that people are always telling me that I'm brave. And it was always like, not really. I just like to talk about like, sucking dick on the internet. Who gives a shit?
I have to wonder, is there a difference between being brave and being numb?
Maybe not. I think being brave is a bit, probably a more active stance. Fair. I don't think the behavior is different. It's probably more like intention. I do now, like I think I'm much more in tune with especially now that I'm starting to practice psychotherapy and in like working in psychotherapy and in grad school, I'm kind of in a space where I'm exploring more of how these things have affected me. But really I found that like what the ultimate realization, despite like, there is hardship and it comes with a lot of sacrifice, because being a woman basically always comes with sacrifice. But if you want to talk about sex, it's like a whole different ballgame, is that it makes you really, really strong and really, really sure of yourself. And it really, really, really teaches you who you are. And you do not put up with bullshit anymore.
Oh, absolutely. I really feel like there is something to be said for sitting in that power of understanding your sexual self and pleasure. That is it. I know for me, I won't speak for you. It absolutely unlocked a fearlessness that I think anytime you have ever been a trauma survivor, I think you unlock a certain level of, and you name it beautifully, which is less fucks to give or zero fucks to give. Yeah. But also there's this power of being able to say, it's okay for me to have pleasure and it's okay for me to understand my body. And you can just fuck right off if you have any judgments about me for that. And I do think it narrows your circle.
I think the thing, Erica, is like when you become like a sexually empowered woman, you are untouchable.
Woo! Yep. Absolutely.
There is not a fucking thing anyone can use. You're like, yeah, come at me, bitch.
That's right. I think when I did a lot of work, and the listeners are aware, I worked with a lot of people who have committed sexual crimes, and
wow.
I think that there is something to what you just said, that facing the people who have done those things, like it gives you a sense of self that cannot. It's just I can't be shook. You can get me to get to a fighting place for sure. To want to be a bulldog for somebody, but I don't know that. I definitely have encountered many a man, for sure. They find out that I own my own business and that I know more about sex than they do, and it is a problem.
Oh yeah, I mean it's like they immediately either resort to slut shaming or some sort of negging most of the time.
Yes, because exactly that.
And it's hilarious to watch them kind of struggle with their own lack of self-awareness. And you can see it in their eyes, like the short circuiting. Like for instance, like I've started doing this thing. So I was saying before we started recording that I have hypermobility, and right now I have of the joints, and I have an injured wrist. So now I'm wearing a wrist guard when I'm out in public. And now my default response when men come up to me, when my husband will be like in the bathroom, and so like immediately like gross dudes are coming up to me, welcome to the world of being a woman, and like will immediately ask me about the brace, because they think it's going to be disarming, and I immediately say, I actually sprained my wrist because I'm a rigger in shibari, and then the immediate response is, well, what's shibari? And I'm like, it's the art of Japanese rope tying. I tie mostly men, into human chandeliers with ropes. And they're like, I'm like, and then I immediately, they're like dumbfounded. And then I just go, it's a sex thing. And they get so freaked out. 3 times I have done it. 3 times they've walked away.
That's right. That's right.
It's like,
get out of here. I do. This kind of like shifting gears, but I think it's completely related. I think it was yesterday you tweeted that you'd love to see the browser histories of all the people who say porn is evil.
Yeah.
And we'd already mentioned we'd love to see Sean Hannity's browser history, but didn't Pornhub do state by state basis of the data collection they've done on what people are watching in each state? I think that gives us some evidence of what all of these people who say that porn is evil, what they're actually watching.
Yeah, I mean, Pornhub, you know, being owned by MindGeek, sort of like the evil, like whatever corporations that they're owned by, they actually have like a pretty dedicated research team that like that like handles a lot of these like really interesting stats and is not afraid to share their data like at all. In fact, like publicizes that I probably get a PR email from them like twice a week
every year
with like all of these statistics.
Pornhub infograph that they put out.
Interesting. I love their infographics. They're so well researched, really well done, and speaking of like not giving a fuck, they clearly do not. But yeah, like speaking of people who like hate, they were actually was reading I was listening to a podcast. This is just based on a podcast that I had heard, but like I think he's a researcher at Pornhub, and he was saying that like in the southern states specifically, kind of like below the Mason-Dixon line, the like the number one, there are the two main searches when it comes to porn are gay porn and is my husband gay.
Yeah, that's not a surprise. We actually right this moment live in Southwest Florida. This is in the before time, of course, but anytime I will not right now, yo. This summer sucks here. It's rough. 90 degrees with friggin' 100% humidity is not in October. No, November. That's when you can be jealous of the Florida weather. But anyway, fair. Like they honestly, every time I have been out and we're out at a bar or something and someone asks me what I do, especially if it is an older male, usually I get complete silence until then they've had a few beverages and then they're coming over and asking me questions about why their dick doesn't work.
Yeah, shocker.
So and it's within 20 minutes, right? Like it's every single time.
Oh yeah, it's like with that. It's almost like clockwork. You just wait. Yeah.
Yep.
Or I have guys like where I'll say like I'll kind of like we'll meet. I'm actually quite an introverted person, like in person. But when I get a couple drinks in me, I'm suddenly like the belle of the fucking ball. So I'm just like like talking to random people all the time, and like that's not me at all. So like I was like at one point talking to these I talked to these guys at a different table than us that we were sitting at a bar a while back, like in the before times, or not really the before times, but it was like when some restrictions were lifted. And I, at that point, speaking of like, I have to say, like when it comes to coronavirus, I was definitely like late to the understanding how bad it was game, which is kind of like, it's kind of, so I'm at a bar and I'm kind of doing the chatty thing that I do. And I start talking to these like random guys at a different table. My husband, like, God bless him. He's quite a like sweet, stoic kind of guy. Kind of goes along with it. He always is like so accommodating to my like being a weirdo. And I'm like talking to these random guys. They turn out to be like construction workers. They call them builders here, whatever. And they seem really cool, whatever. And then they start saying like, which is kind of it's like either men are asking you like sex questions, and like that's one thing, but they were saying like really kind of like, and at the time I was like a bit drunk, so it didn't really register with me. Normally I would have told them to go fuck themselves, but it didn't register with me until the next day, like how inappropriate some of the things they said were. Because like either guys will say like really sexually inappropriate stuff to you because they think they can, because they make this assumption people who are not like people like these are kind of, you know, they're construction workers. They're not exactly like part of the sex positive community. They, not that that's really an excuse for toxic masculine bullshit, but they make it an assumption that because I'm a sex therapist, I am sexually available to them. Meanwhile, I'm there wearing a wedding and engagement ring with my husband.
Mm-hmm. Or it's like a test.
It was just like, yeah. They're trying to like test my, I think they're trying to test the parameters of my marriage a lot of the time. Like they want to see how much and also how much they can get away with me, because they think they think that people make all kinds of assumptions, like that I must be a huge slut who cheats on him all the time because I'm a sex therapist, that kind of thing, which is.
Y'all don't see me nodding at Gigi right now. There's definitely assumptions based on when you're a therapist and like when you're a therapist, and God forbid when you say you're a sex therapist.
Yeah. Like I now, like I will just say I'm a journalist, not at bars, but like with doctors and stuff. Cause I just like, I'm not going to talk about sex with my doctors or like my physical therapist. And I don't even want to invite those questions. So I'll just be like, oh, I'm a journalist. I don't even mention the sex stuff because it's like, I'm not even trying to do that. Cause I know that I think and it's kind of wraps back to like our whole point of like knowing your people. It's like randos that you meet at the bar are not going to be your people.
That's right.
And it might be fun to play like Gigi who has the answers that night. But like, ultimately those people are not going to become more sexually enlightened.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right in that. I definitely have my line, like I'm in communication or something absolutely innocuous when I don't want to answer questions, because the minute I say I'm a therapist, that is when every single person needs to tell me, every trauma they've ever had in their entire life. And I didn't want to do that when I'm having beverages with my friends and family. Yeah. So I get it, like that, trying to assess, okay, who belongs in your life and accepts you as Gigi or as Erica.
Such a good barometer are the emotional vampires in your life who don't treat you like a friend, they treat you like their therapist. That's like, and I've had plenty of people come into my life where I set that boundary pretty early on where I'm like, I am obviously know a lot about sex. If you're having a sexual issue or boyfriend issue, I am here for you as a friend. I do not want to be your therapist and I will not be your therapist. And I have people who don't understand that boundary, will disregard it. And those people don't stay in my atmosphere for very long.
That's right. I remember the first time I had met someone new, and I keep my circle pretty tight as well for very similar reasons. And I remember when I was meeting somebody and she actually named it before I had ever addressed it with her. She said, I don't want to just be your friend because you're a therapist. And it was like the first time anybody had actually volunteered that before I had said it. And I was like, oh, you're in.
Isn't that amazing how like you don't even realize sometimes what you need until someone gives it to you and you're just like, oh, wow. That's why it's very difficult for me these days to have friends who are just like not actively a part of the sex positive community because like they just don't understand boundaries.
Yes, absolutely. Or they're threatened and can be really cruel, which I have definitely encountered too. So
God.
Gigi, you are just a joy, and we'd figured out we were twins very early in our conversation before we started recording, and I just am feeling so lucky to have gotten to chat with you. So how do people find you in the world?
You can find me on Instagram and on Twitter at Gigi Engle. That's GIGIENGLE. You can also find me on my website, MissGigiEngle.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter called The G Spot. And it's, in my opinion, very funny. And it comes out every Monday, and there is a personalized message from me. There you can find the Ask Gigi column from that week, which is where I give advice on a commonly asked question from readers, as well as a roundup of my favorite articles. And, you can also email me if you have a specific question about coaching or therapy, Gigi@MissGigiEngle.com.
Thank you. Again, you're just fantastic. And folks, we have been lucky to listen to Gigi today. Please go find Gigi in all of those places. Everything will be in the show notes. And thanks for listening to the end. We'll see you next time.